Welcome to PhD with Woman on It, Hack the Future. My name is Beata Young, and today's PhD Positivity Hack delivered will be by our guest Andrew Weaver. Topic: Strategies to Accelerate Women in Senior Leadership. Episode 134 starts here. Let me remind you, this is a grassroots community that focuses on women on IT, an inclusive forum of women in technology, startups, and female leaders who are supported by men as well. And I bring heart to that hustle because empathy is my motto, and empathy is critical when you're working on strategies to accelerate women in senior leadership. First, let me mention what's been happening in the world of technology. Congratulations to our former PhD guest, Guy Kawasaki, for the successful launch of his new book, Think Remarkable. Cheers to the founder of Perfect Pitch Group and our former PhD guest, Precious Williams, on receiving the Badass Woman in Her Story Award this coming March 16th in Boston, Massachusetts. Congratulations, Precious. Well deserved. Happy International Women's Month to all of us again. May this month grant us the courage and inspiration to continue to thrive, support one another, and work towards a future where every woman is empowered, respected, and valued. Cheers to us. Thank you, Andrew, for being part of this movement and for supporting us on the leadership ambitions, or however you may call it, because today we are actually going to talk about how to accelerate women in senior leadership. Imagine a world where the corner office isn't defined by gender. Is that the reality we face? Or are talented women still navigating an uneven playing field? In this episode, we tackle the persistent challenge of getting women into senior leadership roles. Our guest, Andrew Weaver, brings over 20 years of executive experience across various industries to the table. We'll dive deep into actionable strategies to help high potential women navigate the path to C-suite. Andrew, let's start with a question. Where are you joining us from?
Hello, Beata. Lovely welcome and a lovely introduction. Thank you for that. I'm joining you from London, West London, where I'm partly based. I actually live in Madrid, but I've got a place here as well. So joining you from West London today.
Well, I'm more kind of a grey area right now. I mean, grey in terms of climate, but definitely working towards the female advancement into the leadership positions. I'm sorry about my voice. For some reason, I'm just coughing. Maybe that's some men who are trying to keep the table for themselves. Anyway, I'm glad that you're not one of them and you want us.
I've got a glass of water here, Beata. If I could share it virtually, I would do.
Fantastic. Well, to help me navigate through that, let's ask you some questions so you can do the talking now. So, Andrew, having witnessed a significant lack of diversity in tech leadership, what surprised you most about unconscious bias?
Well, thank you for giving me a tough opening question, Beata. I thought you were going to give me a gentle introduction there and I could talk about myself for a while. But let me tie in a little bit of my past into what I've seen and what I see in terms of unconscious bias and bias more generally, if I may just expand it slightly. So my journey into tech was actually quite a slow one. I arrived in tech only about 10 years ago. I had previously been involved in family businesses, but also importantly to this connection here, I was also involved in legal services. And I think legal services suffered similar bias, gender bias, stereotyping, lack of representation. And I think they're slightly ahead now of tech. And because what I've seen in tech, and the stats back it up, worryingly so, is that there's still a huge imbalance of representation, of opportunities. I mean, one statistic that I thought was extraordinary when I was just researching ahead of this conversation was that the large tech layoffs that we saw in 2022, and you'd think by now there'd be some balance, but 69% of the layoffs were females in an industry where there's clearly not enough female representation as it is. So there's clearly a huge problem in tech. And we'll obviously explore that and dive into that. But there's a balance to it as well. I mean, it's always an issue, I think, with these kind of conversations. At CTO Academy, we have a global community of female tech leaders, and there are as many examples where there hasn't been bias as there are where there have. But I think acknowledging that it exists, acknowledging that there is a big problem, I think is crucial, and therefore that's key to this conversation. And the bias goes subtle and overt. I'll give you two quick examples, Beata. I had a session only yesterday with a group of people from CTO Academy, of which a good number of them were female. One of them actually said that she had explicitly been told that as a woman she couldn't take a particular role. It was in a country which, dare I say, is still perceived a little bit as macho, but it's clearly still a big issue out there. But I think it's the more subtle, as you say, the unconscious bias that is still rippling and causing blockers. The classic one is promotion. Promotion still, I think there's a statistic that says that in the general community, there is a bias towards men where 86 women get 100 men, or 86 for every 100 men. In tech, it's about half of that. So for every 100 jobs that go to men, something like 53% go to women. Extraordinarily poor imbalance. And I think one of the issues that we have is that there's still a huge bias in things like the interview process. Those kind of questions that women will know. I don't get them. I'm from the, I am from the slightly entitled world of white male middle class. But the kind of questions that go on, sometimes unseen, will she know how to assert herself in a leadership role? It's probably a classic kind of knockback. And I think those things are the things that we need to be very, very aware of and to call out. I think that's the only way that you can continue to knock on this door, is to call them out, because it is a cultural change and a cultural shift that has to come in both micro movements and also macro movements as well. So that's a rather long, rambling initial answer to your question there, Beata. It's clear that change is coming, and change can come from the individual, but also culturally it has to come as well.
Well, absolutely. Change is coming. Change is, however, stopped by many tools, like, for example, artificial intelligence, machine learning. It is learning from our behaviors. When we are not applying for more exciting positions, more ambitious positions, it reckons we are not worthy of it, and it shows us just mediocre positions. That's one of the examples that has been showcased in terms of search engines. Now, but let's go back to your personal story, because your rugby playing story is quite relatable here. How did you experience playing rugby connect to the cultural challenges you witnessed in tech?
Well, I mean, listen, rugby culturally is not particularly warm to females. Now, that world has changed dramatically, as has every other sector of society. And women's rugby and women's sport in general has a much higher profile, and quite right too. So it is challenging and has challenged those stereotypes. But certainly from my experience, a generation ago, 20, 25 years ago, was appalling misogyny, I'm afraid, appalling misogyny, and certainly an appalling relationship or communication with women. So that kind of rugby club culture was something that I particularly went against and pushed back against. And so, I've always had an instinct against any kind of club scenario. It doesn't matter whether it's gender bias or whether it's any other form of bias. The lack of diversity is never a positive thing in any environment. And the statistics are very clear on diversity within businesses, that businesses are more profitable when they are more diverse. And the other statistic that comes through, and studies that come through, are that women who have at least 50%, companies that have at least 50% of women on the board are more successful and are enabling women to get promoted quicker and more effectively within those organizations. So it's only a good thing, clearly, for society. as well as for women in general, that kind of diversity is brought in and applied to all areas of society. But that's certainly my background in terms of having seen that and being rather appalled by it. I think that's part of the fire that burns within me to make sure that I'm doing what I can within my own world to try and help change.
Now, you mentioned the legal representation of females has changed. Is it because females know how to fight? In a legal profession, they know how to fight for their rights, or is there any policies that have been implemented in that profession?
Well, I go back to my point about culture. I think you can bring in legislation, but it's the culture that needs to shift. It's the behaviours that need to shift. And I think why I mention law, because I have experience of it, why I mention law as being ahead of tech, is that if you went back 15 or 20 years, my particular area was barristers. I was chief executive of a barristers' chambers 20 years ago in Manchester, in England, where when I arrived, the representation of females was very low. I think from memory, something like 15 to 20% of chambers was female, but more than that, it was an oppressively male environment and culture, and at that stage, perhaps 20 years ago, the females, all brilliant, talented, were tiptoeing around that culture. It wasn't an environment where they often felt they had enough support to challenge it in the open. And I think as many of your audience will know and will have experienced, that if you can challenge it, if you've got a culture where you can challenge it, it will change it. But if it just gets swept under the carpet for whatever reason, then clearly change is difficult, if not impossible. And certainly within the legal environment, I have seen a complete transformation in female representation at the higher levels from where it was 15 or 20 years ago. And what that means is that when things are seen as being wrong, they are now, there's a higher comfort zone in terms of, for people to go and challenge it. And I'll give you one very quick example in the legal world. Someone I know very, very well who has now reached the level of head of chambers, a female head of chambers, of which there are many now, but certainly there were not in the past. She was told of a judge that had bullied a junior female member of chambers. Now that junior member of chambers would be completely intimidated by a court judge applying bullying. Now, 15, 20 years ago, culturally, in the law, that probably would have just been one of those things. Oh, it's that judge does one of those things. Now it's not. And that head of chambers challenged it and got an apology, and I don't think that judge will ever be doing it again. So I raised the legal world because I think it is ahead of tech, but I think that's the only way that we can change it, is that we get the confidence to call it out, amongst other strategies that no doubt we'll go through. But I think culturally, that's a super important change.
Well, it's a good time for me to remind our viewers about the great role model, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who actually championed laws like the Equal Pay Act, the Pregnancy Discrimination Act, the Family and Medical Leave Act, and the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act. But coming back to our discussion about rugby, we have a comment from Agata Bellon. She says, questions at interviews, a great point, but what about small talk? It is dispiriting how many male interviewers can't stop talking about chasing balls around fields to start a conversation.
Well, listen, I think it's a great point. I mean, I'm going to come back directly to that question in a second, but the point you raised earlier, Beata, about AI and machine learning is picking up on where we are as a culture now. It's a massive issue, and I think I forget the author now, but there was you may know the answer to this, Beata. There was someone who picked up that the internet basically was written by men, and you've got institutions created by men. So this kind of whole cultural bias in the direction of men. It is something that's going to take a while to change. And of course, there is this risk that we're about to embed it into AI and machine learning, which is why we need to accelerate this. But it's a great point from Agata, because conversations, men forget how discriminating or what barriers can be thrown up by the kind of conversations they have. Sport discussion, because you assume because there were a few men in the group on a Zoom call that it's a chat about football. It's that it's that what word for it? That just that change of mindset about being inclusive for everybody within a conversation, within an interview process, within a bar culture. That classic thing, the bro culture. Let's all go down the bar and drink lots. Again, studies suggest that that's still very pervasive. The majority of women still view they're in a company that has that kind of culture. So yes, it's a big issue, and I think language and inclusivity is a massive issue that men have to address in terms of making sure it is as inclusive as possible, for sure.
Mm. So it's
Beata, can I just quickly mention before I forget, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, talk about a female icon. My 10-year-old daughter bought a pair of Ruth Bader Ginsburg socks recently. So I love that. It's a fabulous moment.
Well, that's interesting, Andrew, because I believe that men who raise daughters are more attuned to female rights than men who raise boys, because it's all boys club and they don't have to worry about, it's female issues. We quite often experience the fact that men are asking me, I can't really be part of this conversation, or I can't really be part of the network or support your community because I'm a man, I'm not a female. Whereas if we leave this problem to females, it's the half population fighting for the change to happen, whereas another half will be just waiting for change to happen. We need to involve everybody because the biggest problems are shared problems that nobody owns, but everybody is affected by. And as you mentioned before, it is impacting not just the legal, not just the tech, it is impacting economy overall. And especially given the fact that, for example, Malta, where we started, a Woman on IT was launched in Malta. The economy could be so much better because Malta is at the tail end of female representation at the workplace. I'm not just talking about entrepreneurship. At the workplace. So there are so many women who rely on their husbands to bring money to the table. Now, let's go back to the policy making. As we mentioned before, over and over in a couple of episodes, I like to quote Helena Daly, who said, "It's so easy to change regulation. It's so difficult to change the mindset." So how can you see, or what policies can you see could change the mindset that should be implemented in every company that wants to be diverse?
Gosh, Beata, you keep giving me these very challenging questions. I mean, I'm not a policymaker, and I'm not close enough to policy, to be perfectly honest with you, to come out with an educated response to that. Because for me, it is all about culture, yes, of course, legislation has to influence and change behavior as well. But actually, even when you have some legislation, it takes some time for it to filter through culturally. So I'm not a massive, I don't have a massive knowledge bank of what policy could change things, other than making sure that the policies that are already in place are implemented. And again, I'm sorry to repeat myself, but it comes back to culture. It comes back to culture from the top of an organization. What guardrails they've built into their organization as they've grown it. I mean, I come from a startup background, so you can see how a company evolves comes from those founders, comes from those early hires, comes from the principles of the guardrails that they've put in place as they've built that company. If those guardrails are not inclusive, if they're not championing diversity, representation, then that company will just build on the foundations of that culture. So I'm not a great fan, someone who knows a lot about policy, Beata, but as it needs to be implemented, and that's the key. And I think this comes back to the calling it out element, is to have confidence in what you know should be happening, in how you know you should be being treated. And we haven't touched on confidence, Beata, in this conversation as yet, because I think that's a massive element of a massive blocker for a lot of women to actually move forward in an organization. But certainly confidence of valuing yourself and understanding what is and isn't right, and not tolerating it, I think is super important. So I've slightly push that back to you on policy, Beata, because I'm a great believer. It's all about culture. It's all about micro changes.
Micro changes, micro actions. So let's start with us. It problems lays with in our basket, or however, whatever rugby terminology you want to use. So how to gain confidence? What do you believe or what you observe works best to not to be too cocky, but actually be very matter-of-factly confident as a female?
Can we not refer to rugby again, Beata? I left that behind a long time ago. I think there's a couple of ways I'd like to unpack this. I notice it and I see it. I mean, all of us suffer from imposter syndrome. It's not a gender issue. It's an issue for all of us. And, you know, self-doubt is part of that. It's part of our journey, really. I suffer from it, and I'm sure you do, as do others. But I think it is a bigger issue for females, because there's a couple of wonderful video clips. If people haven't seen it already, then they should definitely do it. One is from Michelle Obama that talks about the fact that self-doubt never disappears. You know, that society, from a female perspective, society is always making you question your value and your worth, your looks, how you talk, all of these things that you're constantly having to bat away as a female. And people in power have wanted that historically, and they continue to want that. So those are issues that females and women have to definitely challenge differently to males, and that's, I think, where some of the confidence issue comes from. There's another clip that I recommend people having a look at, which is from Reshma Siani. I think it's Suani. I apologize if I've quoted her surname wrong, but she's the founder of Girls Who Code, amongst other things. Very impressive woman. And she talks in a particular clip, she talks about being asked to deliver a presentation where Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and other great luminaries are in the audience, and essentially being asked, are you okay with all of these people? And she says she's met all these CEOs, all these presidents, all these prime ministers, and basically she always asks herself, these people are running the world? She can't believe. I mean, you're probably aware of something called the Peter Principle. And the Peter Principle within organizations is where people in a hierarchy tend to rise to the level of their incompetence. The bigger the organization, the more you probably encounter this. So essentially, you hit up against a manager who's just useless. They've just arrived at their level of incompetence. And I always think there's a reason why it was called Peter Principle. There probably historically is a reason it's called Peter Principle and not Petra Principle. It's because most of the managers historically have been male. And so Reshma talks about the fact that she noticed and realized actually that women progressing within an organization, it's never been about their qualifications or how ready they are or how prepared they are. It's about the fact that they're constantly battling the kind of undeserved, unearned privilege of those that are in power, which is, of course, a historic thing. It's a legacy thing. Women are good enough and strong enough, and no more is this going to continue, basically, she says. We are here, we can lead, which I think is brilliant. It's a very powerful message, because I think that assumption that people in power, that people above you have got a skill set that you haven't got is almost always a myth. True meritocracy, which is coming, but still, of course, has lots of hurdles to get past. True meritocracy means that we will at some stage move this historical legacy of undeserved and unearned privilege aside in a way that it isn't at the moment. And just to go back very quickly to the CTO Academy experience, we work with tech leaders all around the world, and we did a survey a year or two ago with very senior people, where we basically are very senior tech leaders, where we basically asked them what were the key attributes of successful technology leaders. And when they listed them, almost none of them were to do with technology. Almost none of them were to do with technology. Successful senior technology leaders, it was almost always about the soft skills. And when you break those soft skills down, they're very feminine. If you think about it, great leadership is about empathy. It's about admitting mistakes. It's about listening. It's about being very people-centered, which I would argue are much more feminine traits historically than they are male traits. So there's a reason why mostly men in place, and it's because of the patriarchy, it's because of the history of it. So I do recommend having a look at those clips from Michelle Obama and Reshma Siani, because they're interesting and they're inspirational, because you shouldn't be beating yourself around the head with this imposter syndrome the barriers that society has put in the way, because they will slowly, gradually, incrementally be removed, and hopefully it will be easier to reach the top. But we're going to go through some strategies shortly, Beata, I think, aren't we, about how to get to the top?
Oh, absolutely. Strategies are the main reason we are here with Andrew Weaver. So stay with us. Don't go to watch Michelle Obama. It's definitely much more worthy to stay with us, because I've got a great quotation that summarizes your point. If you think you are too small to be effective, you have never been in bed with a mosquito, as Betty Reese says. Now, speaking of comments and our community, we have another comment from Agata. It is interesting you discussed the law profession and progress there, but one thing I find disappointing is the fact younger generations, like say the crypto bros, and they are predominantly bros, seem not to have moved on, even as dads like you have moved forward.
Yep. I mean, what can I say? There are still major issues and cultural issues within the younger generation, for sure. I don't have enough exposure to the crypto world to be able to comment directly, Agatha, but I'm sure it exists and I'm sure it's there. So yes, it is a concern. And of course, listen, again, we unfortunately are in an era where politics has become very macho again, and people are very successful on the basis of how belligerent and macho and misogynist to some extent that people can be. So we are fighting a rather larger cultural monster that we have to defeat in terms of who is deemed as being successful, and that can only influence the younger generation as well. So yes, I accept that we mustn't be complacent. But again, the people who are in leadership roles, the people who are investing in some of these crypto projects can influence behavior. So yes, I accept the point, but a lot of work still to be done.
A lot of work for us women, a lot of work for men as well to support us and also recognize our talents. And another quotation, success is not about climbing to the top, but refusing to be kept at the bottom. And this has been delivered by Shirley Chisholm. In the 1972 United States presidential election, she became the first Black candidate to seek a major party's nomination for president of the United States and the first woman to run for the Democratic Party's presidential nomination. So there you go. In 1972, she had the courage, the urge to do it. So can you? Now we have a comment from Patrick. In Patrick's opinion, that's my husband, a great conversation. Oh, Lawrence J. Peter invented the Peter principle. Using my masculine intuition, I'm guessing. Here is Patrick's opinion. Now, strategies. I see that you're urging to give us some strategies, hints, and tips on how to tackle that challenge. Go on.
Well, again, just to clarify, the challenges that there are definitely there for women to progress in leadership roles, which men don't have. There is something called the double bind paradox. Again, your audience may be familiar with this. Patrick, I may be familiar with this now. Now he's raised the Peter principle with me. But the double bind paradox is essentially that men who are successful in leadership roles tend to be a mixture of or be seen as having a mixture of being powerful and likable. The challenge for women, and again, it's down to stereotyping and legacy, is that the more powerful women are, the less likable they become. That's what is known as the double bind paradox. You may disagree with it, you may have seen alternatives to that, but that can happen and often does happen. So surveys and studies are quite clear. I think there was a research by Stanford on this that researched successful female leaders, that the skill that they have is that they can adapt and adjust their interactions. They can essentially be assertive and confident, but can adapt and need to adapt to get promotion, to advance. And so awareness of that, I think, then you start to break that down into slightly more micro strategies as to how you can arrive at that understanding. And I think there are lots of different tips, I would say, and I think a lot of this stuff comes down actually more generically to leadership challenges and to leadership understanding. For example, I think you should always strip straight back to the core about yourself when it comes to addressing how to become a leader. And self-leadership, for example, is a topic. So we talk a lot at CTO Academy. We don't even go into any other element of the course without first addressing some key issues around self-leadership and around personal values and boundaries. And I think you can take away the gender discussion here. This is actually about you. And so what do I mean by self-leadership? Well, McKinsey did a study, I think 3 or 4 years ago, on the skills required for future leaders. It was a future leadership perspective. And basically they said that a quarter of your skill set, it has to be down to self-leadership. And what do I mean by self-leadership? Well, we have an interview at CTO Academy with a guy called Andrew Bryant, who wrote essentially the best-selling book on self-leadership. So I'm quite close to Andrew and what he covers in that book. And he breaks self-leadership down to 3 things: self-awareness, self-regulation, and self-learning. Now, self-awareness, sometimes you need external help. It's sometimes useful to have a coach to understand, to be self-aware and to understand how other people perceive you. It's not always easy. And perception can be a very, very important factor of leadership. So self-awareness, sometimes you need to bring in a coach or you need to bring external guidance just to make sure that you're understanding the perception of who you are as a leader. So that's one of them. Self-regulation is really just modulating your reactions and your emotions in terms of leading people. And again, it's just understanding who you are and where you come from and making sure that people are perceiving you in a certain way as a leader. So self-regulation is modulating behavior, really. And self-learning is something that we cover at CTO Academy. It's that endless curiosity of wanting to learn, of wanting to grow professionally and personally. So self-leadership, I think, is a really, really important step in terms of building your leadership skill set. And when I talk about personal values and boundaries, I think, again, that's super, super important in dealing with some of the issues that we've been talking about. So for example, who are you? What are you actually capable of? What do you feel that you're capable of? Taking away all of these barriers, all of this bias, all of this potential discrimination, just getting to the core of who you are, what you want from life. I used to run a startup accelerator a few years ago, about 3 or 4 years ago, and the accelerator was basically helped people who were in corporate jobs that they didn't particularly like, lawyers, management consultants type of thing. And we used to help them understand how to start up a business. So they were aspirational entrepreneurs. And one of the very first things that we did with them was actually got them to understand their own values and to really, really drill into the core values. And what I mean by that is we used to give them a test. We used to give them a piece of paper with 100 values on them. And this could be everything from honesty to being ethical to a variety of other things. And we used to say to them, drill down, remove 90 of those 100 values, come down to 10 values that represent who you are, that are part of your core. So they all used to sit there and they used to scribble out all these things, and you could see them thinking it through, and it was great. And then they'd get to this list of 10 values at the end of this 2 or 3 minute session. And then I'd say to them, right, now split up those 10 values to 5. And they really began to worry about this because they were beginning to eliminate values that they thought were important, but they weren't core to who they are. And so we got to their core values. And the reason why I go through that in some detail is that if you don't understand your core values, you don't understand your intrinsic motivation, then you may be making career choices and life choices that are not actually what you should be doing. So self-leadership and personal values and boundaries are super, super important starting point for understanding your leadership journey and where you're going. Because if you don't understand yourself, you can't lead other people. Now, Beata, I saw you come on screen there, which is that an indication that I've rambled too long about self-leadership?
No, it's absolutely very valid points you're making, and it's very valuable tools that let us be aware of who we bring to the table. I mean, as we sit at the table, as we have that seat at the table. However, there are moments of going back to the drawing board when you hear something that may not necessarily be true, or some unconscious bias, or microaggressive comment that make us really vulnerable. So how would you tackle that? How can you counteract that? Because apparently the research shows that for one negative comment, you need 7 positive comments to counterbalance that.
Listen, yes, of course. I mean, when you're doing a presentation, I'm sure I'm not alone in this, but you'll be doing a presentation to 200 people. 199 of them can be smiling at you and applauding. You're only noticing the one who's grimacing. It's a very, very human instinct to fester on the negative completely. And again, if we go back to some of the points raised earlier about that self-doubt that never disappears. So yes, that's an issue that we all have to grapple with, and perhaps women more so because of the societal pressures. But what I would say is it goes back to kind of the points I'm making. If you understand your intrinsic motivation, if you understand what you're capable of, the direction of travel that you're going in, and you're set and secure and confident in that, then you're going to have knockbacks. You're going to have this unconscious bias. You're going to have resistance that seems completely unfair and seems completely focused on or is based around gender bias. You can't change the world. That's the reality of where we are at the moment. But you can make these micro steps, these incremental changes in your own leadership skill set, in your own understanding of where you want to go with your career. And again, if these microaggressions are blocking you and should be challenged, then you need to call them out. You need to be in an environment that is psychologically safe to do that. Again, I say this with the caveat that I am white and male and middle class, but I've seen the evidence of people that are dealing with these leadership challenges in this way, and that are developing that assertiveness and that confidence where they are adapting to the environments that they're facing on a day-to-day basis, because that definitely is core to being successful. But there are a number of other areas that strategies for developing your leadership presence, and they could be everything from strategically self-promoting your personal branding, visibility, being seen within an organization by the people that you need to be seen by, demonstrating your understanding of the bigger picture. All of these things are stepping stones towards you building up your profile and making it impossible for them not to give you those promotions and not to give you that advancement. And if they don't, then clearly there is overt bias going on. So I think it's positioning yourself in a way that makes your progress unstoppable, frankly, whatever the bias that are going on in the background. And a little thing that also I picked up on is the issue of, and it may seem quite small, but I think it's something people should consider and have a look at, is body language and posture. And all of these small, just micro changes that can, power and authority is often non-verbally expressed. And so again, if you're just thinking about those small changes that you can make on your career path, these are the small things that you should be thinking about and looking at for yourself, for your own progress, in my view.
Oh, absolutely. We talked in our previous episodes about upspeak. When you finish sentence that sounds like a question, that definitely not instills confidence in your ability to lead. So stop upspeaking. Speak up, but never upspeak. Now, with your CTO Academy, Andrew, I know that you've been working with women of color. What are some of the biggest challenges for them? Have you heard some stories, or have you been working with them to help them, progress in the very difficult world of technology or leadership?
Well, look, the statistics are appalling. Again, the statistics that I mentioned earlier about the challenges and the imbalance of women in senior leadership roles and in senior technology roles, just multiply when you're a woman of color. So again, the bias that is going on for females alone is multiplied when you tend to be a female of color. So what have I experienced personally? I mean, we have a number of women of color in CTO Academy community. They are all incredibly highly motivated individuals. I haven't heard any direct stories. I'm aware of the statistics. I'm aware of the challenges that there are out there. But again, it would be unfair and unwise for me to pontificate about something I'm not, necessarily directly involved in. Other than that, I'm aware of that the challenges are greater, statistically proven are greater for women of colour in tech. So I'm sorry, Beata. That was another. I've had to pass that back to you.
No problem at all. Well, definitely, you have to multiply the efforts, and the micro actions are still valid for women of color. And we vouch for you, ladies and gentlemen, whoever want to be noticed.
One thing I would say, one thing that's just crossed my mind, and I think this goes back to was it Agatha? I think about the conversation about rugby or something. I think it's incumbent in those that are in positions of leadership and of power to make sure that they are aware of what's going on in the real world. They are aware of the statistics. They are aware of the bias, because that's part of the problem. If they are lacking awareness of how they're communicating and what the challenges are for certain members of the community, then that's a big part of the problem. I just suggest to any leader, whether they're male or female, but just be aware of where those barriers are. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to, everybody should be getting a role purely on meritocracy. And I don't think there's anybody who would argue against that, female or male. It has to be about meritocracy. But being aware where the barriers are, as someone who is in an incumbent leadership role, is super important. So, making sure you're aware of the latest statistics from surveys that prove that there is this bias. Understanding, communicating, talking perhaps with people. I mean, one of the things you've now made me think about, Beata, is that I should be reaching out. I should be reaching out actually to people in our community and just saying, are there challenges that you're facing that we can help you with? So I think it is incumbent on those that are in positions of authority and leadership to be aware of all of this background information and be making sure that their organisations are at the front line of changing all of this.
I love that idea. I would love to work with you closely to help you reach out to these ladies. Mm-hmm. And I know that you've got some exciting project with CTO Edge Academy. What are your long-term goals for fostering a more inclusive and equitable leadership landscape in tech, Andrew?
Well, we do already have a scholarship with Women Who Code. So we have, I'm not sure the exact numbers. I think it's something like 8 or 10 scholarships over the last year or two that have enabled fantastically talented women in what I would call CTO minus 1 or 2 roles, so heads of engineering, VP of engineering, that kind of role. That's enabled them to come on the course at a dramatically subsidized scholarship rate. So we've really tried to do something proactive about encouraging and accelerating women to senior roles. So that's the first thing that we certainly do. I think also we're very aware as well at CTO Academy that we're a virtual company, so we don't have any in-person events, the occasional in-person social event, but in terms of the products that we deal with, they're all online. So, and one of the challenges, so we have the same challenges in terms of imbalance percentages. I think we're better than the market, but not much and not enough. So what that means is that there are often Zoom calls or there are often live sessions where there can be one female in the room, and it's literally like that. So we're aware of that, and we do try and address that, and we do also try and make sure that the women that are in those scenarios, are not feeling that they're isolated and not being included in the conversation. So again, that kind of awareness training, that kind of awareness of diversity challenges is something that we train and we deal with within our own team to address, because it is there, even within some of our live sessions. So I think being proactive in trying to accelerate and help people accelerate into leadership roles, and just being aware of where those issues might be within our own product service is important.
You mentioned some self-awareness, self-regulation, self-learning. What are the 5 soft skills or career-driven females should have to help them progress in their leadership ambition?
Great, a great question. I mean, the bottom line is that leadership is all about people. And one of the things that I would say as well is, you should never, if leadership isn't a natural fit for you, you should acknowledge that. And it is about people, and it is about building teams and bringing in people around you that can do the work that perhaps you might have done in the past. So delegation is another very, very important skill that not everybody is comfortable with. So it goes back to the soft skills, certainly within tech. it goes back to some of those soft skills that I mentioned, Beata. You know, that, and again, I repeat, I think they are, you know, they are predominantly historically more feminine than masculine attributes, and they are, which is why I think that female tech leaders are fantastic if given the chance. But it's those very human things about, you know, admitting when you're wrong is a classic example. That, you know, that growth mindset rather than fixed mindset. You know, I've been on a journey. I certainly came from a fixed mindset perspective. I was fairly defensive, a little insecure, to be honest, when I was setting out in my leadership role, and I dare say probably wasn't as inclusive as I should have been. And the point you make about men who have daughters, definitely with me, it had an impact. I hope that I was already improving, but having a daughter certainly opened up my eyes and understanding where the challenges for her might be in the future and what changes I need to be doing. So being inclusive, being able to admit mistakes, moving into a growth mindset where it's not about proving yourself, it's about bringing on others. And there's a wonderful quote from Maya Angelou, which I'm probably going to mess up, but she said something like, "It's not what you do or the impact that you have, it's how you make others feel." That's not exactly the quote, but it's about how you make other people feel as a leader. So it's listening skills, it's dynamic listening. You know, it's the ability to not be thinking about the next question while someone is giving you the answer. Super important. You know, having their best interests. You know, leading from a position where they know that you have their best interests at heart, as well as the company's. Clearly, you need to be looking after the company. So, you know, managing and understanding what the business benefits are for the decisions that you're making as a leader or as an individual within that organization. You know, and communicating. Again, one of the challenges for people that come to CTO Academy is that they're coming from a very technical background. And quite often the challenge that they have is being able to communicate and articulate very, very technical information to potentially a non-technical audience. So that ability to communicate and to bridge that gap is super important, particularly within tech leadership. So those, I think, are the crucial skills in terms of moving into a leadership role.
So coming back to your life lesson quote, which is Maya Angelou's quotation, "I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." So that's all about empathy. And why does it resonate with you? I know that you're in people's business, so obviously you want to keep these customers happy. However, is there any other reason that you keep this quote close to your heart?
I think because one of the things about leadership, I think, when you become a leader is you look back on the leaders that you experienced, and we've probably all experienced good and bad leadership. And when you break it down, when you have a think about what good leadership looked like, it was often about how they made you feel. It was often about how they inspired you. It was often about giving you sufficient trust and confidence in what you were doing to build your knowledge and to build your confidence in progressing. And I think it's like all of these things. It goes back to parenting. I always think that leadership is a little bit like parenting, Beata, as well. You know, it's about looking at what happened when you were younger, when you were a more junior member of the team or earlier in your career, and what and how those leaders inspired you. And for me, certainly, it's always been about how they made me feel. Did they make me feel good? Did they give me a positive response? Was their criticism constructive? Was it built around helping me progress? And I think that's why the Maya Angelou quote, which I'm messed up completely, so thank you for retrieving my position there. But ultimately, the final line was the one that I remembered. You know, how you make those people around you feel is super important. And I think, you know, go back to the communication issue. We have a stand-up at CTO Academy every Monday. We have a team all around the world, half male, half female, but culturally quite different. So the cultural diversity is the big issue that I always have to be sensitive and concerned about. How does this come across to them? Am I communicating in a way that that they will understand? Am I allowing them to absorb it and feel that they're part of that conversation? Or it's not a top-down instruction. It's an instruction that they're happy to communicate back with me. So I think that's about feeling. That's about understanding and empathy and a sense of what those individuals, how those individuals are going to read what you're saying to them. And that's for leaders. It's a challenging quality to build. But it's so important that you are adapting. It goes back to that point I raised earlier about adapting and adjusting your interactions almost on a one-to-one basis. And I think that's super crucial.
Well, you mentioned the fact that you raised a daughter, and there was a lot of talk about how daughters are raised differently. We should not climb trees, and we shouldn't do this. So here is a saying that goes, never worry about, and this is the quotation I'm gonna really mess up, but it's easier to apologize than ask for permission. So that's definitely one of the leadership quote that I would encourage everyone to take on board from today's discussion. Now, Andy, as we are coming close to the end, we always ask this quotation, and we always talk about Eleanor Roosevelt's quotation, which says, "Women are like tea bags. We don't know our true strength until we are in hot water." I don't expect you to feel like a woman, but I want you to ask, how are you in hot water? How are you brewing?
Oh my goodness me! You're giving me so many challenging questions here. How am I in hot water? Yeah, I mean, listen, I've reached a certain age and a certain level of maturity where I think I understand myself certainly better than I did even 5-10 years ago, and I think that comes back to the growth mindset that I have personally shifted, and therefore it's an ongoing journey, and I think again. Going back to some of those key attributes of leaders, I think the ability to know that you know nothing. Bringing up another quote, Beata, this one from Socrates, I think. We know so little in reality about the world around us, and even about everything that you need to know about leadership. So, you bring to the conversation experience. You bring to the conversation kind of steady ship. You're there to make sure that those around you feel that they've got the support they need, but you're also there to learn. And you're there to learn about how you lead people. You're there to learn about the changes that are going on around us and the impact that you can have within those changes. So I think never stop learning is a kind of slight cliche, but cliches are there because they're true most of the time. Never stop learning from those that are coming through. I mean, we've got some amazing people. I've got a female low-code developer at CTO Academy based in Brazil. I think she's in her late 20s, but the age is not important. But she's considerably younger than me, and I just love her style. I love what she's bringing to the conversation. I love her knowledge about the product, and I just want her to grow. I want her to grow with us. I'm sure at some stage she'll move on, but if we can benefit from the 2 or 3 years that she's with us, and I can personally benefit from it, then I will do so. So I think again that ability to constantly learn and be curious. Never stop being curious about anything in life generally, but even within the team and within the business, it's a never-ending, fascinating journey that we're on, and I view that in life and business as well.
Well, curiosity kills the cat, but I've never heard about cat who was killed by the book. So what is the number one book you can sit and think, oh, I wish I read it before I started my journey?
Well, I've got a very, very clear favorite book, and I adore it. It's called Consolations. It's nothing to do with business. It's a book by a poet called David Whyte. And he takes individual words that we use almost every day. They're everyday words, and he unpacks them. He kind of deconstructs them in such a beautiful way. There are many that I could quote, but there's one around friendship, for example. He unpacks what friendship really means, and he comes to the conclusion that it's actually about witness. It's about your friends witnessing your journey through life and supporting you. So just one small example of the kind of way that he deconstructs very simple words in a way that I find truly beautiful, and I can happily read a little of that most days and get some solace from it, some succor.
Beautiful, great recommendation. I wanted to ask you, and we always ask this question at the end of the show. So let's imagine that you could meet anyone in the world for a private breakfast. Who would it be, and where would you choose to meet? Share your pick and the reason why.
I watched a beautiful film recently that I recommend to anybody. It's called All of Us Are Strangers, I think it's called. Yes, All of Us Are Strangers. Really recommend it. And it's about basically the central character goes back to his old family home, and he discovers his mum and dad there who died many years ago. And so it's a kind of a ghost story, but it's a ghost. Originally it was a Japanese story, and the Japanese look at ghosts in a different way than we do in the West. They look at them in quite a positive light, and so it's based around this Japanese story where basically the story is that he reignites his relationship with his parents who have long since died, and it's about memories, but it's also about things unsaid, and it's a beautiful film. I really recommend it. But the reason I raise that is I would be sitting on a beautiful small beach on a Greek island with my dad, who died some years ago, just having those moments, those unsaid moments, those memories, which of course are gone. So that's who I would be sitting and having breakfast with.
Mm. Is it because there is a regret of not asking questions, or what's the reason why would you choose your dad?
Nothing too deep, Beata, but thank you for probing. That's for my psychologist to talk to me about. No, I'm being cheeky. No, it's just it's simply that it's a classic. Again, it's a classic cliche that you know once people have gone, there are always things that you wish you'd said or you'd addressed slightly differently. And I think it's having that moment on the beach for an hour or so, and just I probably would sit in silence with him, to be honest. And it was just having the ability to be able to do that. So if I was having a breakfast with anybody ever, that would be the person that I would choose. And it would be a beautiful bit of Greek yogurt, some blueberries on top, maybe a little honey, and a glass of orange juice.
Well, I guess you will have to wait a little bit till you meet again with your dad. We spoke about that in private conversation about the fact that our parents are not forever given for our life, so we need to make the best of it. And I want you all to remember that you need to make the best out of your leadership assets and out of your potential. And that's it from episode 137 of the PhD live stream. Thanks to our guest Andrew Weaver. Another quotation, final quotation of the day: if you want something said, ask a man. If you want something done, ask a woman, Margaret Thatcher says. To stay updated and ensure you never miss a positivity hack delivered, follow Woman on IT and turn on notifications to be alerted once a video has been released. Next week we are meeting Hieza Harry, and she's going to talk about biodiversity loss and declining yields, rethinking sustainable development from the farmer's daughter perspective. Family is really important to our next guest as well. And I wanted to thank our great commenters, Agata, Bellon, IPOVIT in Patrick's opinion. Thank you once again, Andrew. And since you quoted Maya Angelou, I want to quote as well. If you don't like something, change it. If you can't change it, change your attitude. Today is your day to hack the future, hack the positivity you want. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, production team. Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks, Beata.